Hey guys. Okay, it's been my fourth time trying to get this right because the other times we had some weather. Okay, so at this point, all of your notes should be totally done, and we've had practice in class over a lot of this content. You've had your study guide for about a week. You've had the topic support guide for almost a week, and you have extra study guides online. And then you also had the study guide where I gave you blank cycles to practice. So at this point now, your test is in 6 days. And once we have all the paper done, like all the notes done, you can definitely watch this and add any notes to whatever you have. And yeah, what is this opening? No. Okay. Okay, so this is nutrient cycles, clearly. Your words: nutrient, decomposer, reservoir, runoff, upwelling, assimilation, residence time, sink, source, infiltration, leaching, marine snow, dissociation. It's dissociation, not disassociation, dissociation. Diazotroph, remember troph means feeder, and then saprophytic. Phytic is like philic, which means lover. Okay, so cycling of elements in the ecosystem. Nutrients are going to be essential for life, and they're found in the food chain. I don't like how this is. Why does it look like this? Sorry, I'm just, you know how I am. Anyway, okay, so it's a chemical that's going to provide what's needed for organisms to live. I just don't understand. Okay, whatever. So when organisms die, the decomposers are going to break them down into their tiny, tiny little organic matter. I like to think of it as like a living organism is like a Lego house made out of individual Legos. And then when that organism dies, they get broken apart piece by piece by piece. Maybe the house is broken into 5 big pieces, and then those big ones are taken even apart even further and further and further. That would be like decomposing, breaking them down into their individual building blocks. And then it's turned into like the inorganic form that we can reuse again and have, taken up through uptake of a producer and then assimilated into tissues. And a decomposer is going to be a bacteria or a fungi that can break down dead organic matter and bring it back into the environment. Reservoir. The ocean is a reservoir for a lot of nutrients. A reservoir is going to be part of the abiotic phase, so where nutrients are just going to stay before they're actually put into use from a living organism. Producers of microorganisms can convert or fix inorganic nutrients into the organic substances. So the abiotic cycle will always be put back into the biotic. And then the biotic cycle, the living cycle, will always be broken down back into the abiotic. Some of these nutrients are added to corals, some of it's removed altogether from harvesting and never put back. Molecules are added in through runoff and upwelling. The only thing I don't have in here is dissolving. Also, nutrients can be put in through dissolving. Dissolving is for gases, so dissolving of carbon dioxide, dissolving of nitrogen gas. Runoff is going to be the flow of water from land through precipitation. And then upwelling is the movement of cold, nutrient-rich water from the bottom of the sea to the top of the ocean. And then just figuring out this chart here. So if we're looking at the living phase, the biotic phase, we're going to start with our primary producers. I'm back. If the primary producers get consumed, and that biotic or that living tissue is going to go to the consumers. And then when the consumers die, or if the primary producers die, they're going to be going to the decomposers to just be broken down again into their smaller little nutrients and smaller little building blocks. And then we can have organisms take them up again as they get brought back to the surface. Decomposers are going to put nutrients back into the abiotic phase, the non-living phase. These are going to be like your gases or just phosphorus or ammonia or nitrates. Okay, and then nutrient cycles. So again, they're going to move things from the abiotic, from the non-living to the living phase. And we have this word assimilation. And, you know, I think about it like whenever you're moving to a new country, you're going to assimilate with their culture. So that's what you do. You know, you become more like that culture. So, you know, if I move to England, I'll probably start drinking tea at noon every day. I don't know that they do that. But, you know, it's like assimilating. You're becoming a part of. So in a nutrient cycle, you are assimilating the nutrients into like your organic tissues. You're taking the just individual, you know, nitrogen, phosphorus, magnesiums, and you're incorporating it or assimilating it into like a living molecule for yourself. So the conversion of a nutrient into a usable form that can be incorporated in the tissues of an organism. And then you can read the example there. Reservoirs, that's going to be an area where nutrients are going to remain, and residence time is how long a typical nutrient remains. So the ocean has a really long residence time because nutrients can fall to the bottom of the ocean and never come back up again for, you know, almost millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years. The surface is shorter because you're going to have organisms taking them in. And then our average residence time for phosphorus, 20 to 100,000 years. It's there for a long time. Magnesium, 17 million years. Bicarbonate or carbon is 100,000. And what are they live streaming? Pep rally. Good. Maybe we'll just watch the pep rally from the classroom then. We don't have to go. Just kidding. Nitrogen, 2,000 years, and then calcium is 1 million. Limiting nutrients. So if we're looking at like parts per million, if we took, you know, a sample of seawater and looked at the particles inside of the sample of seawater, this would be what's in there. Okay. The amount of nitrogen and phosphorus affect the rate of growth because they're the most limiting quantity. And if we see this, this is why when we have runoff with fertilizers or we have fecal matter added in, it's heavy in nitrogen, it's heavy in phosphates. And this causes such an algal bloom because it's so limiting. So like chloride and sodium, there's the most amount of them. It's just at the surface, seawater at the surface. Obviously, these things would be heavier towards the bottom because they're dense and so they sink. And they're in parts per million. So if we had 1 million liters of seawater, 1 liter would be, well, I guess 14 liters would be like the hydrogen carbonate. 41.6 liters would be calcium. 129.5 liters would be magnesium. I think I'm doing that math right. If I'm not, whatever, we're just moving on from it. The biggest takeaway here is you're limiting nutrient of nitrate and phosphates. 0.5 and 0.07. Those are very limiting. So whenever there is an influx of them, organisms go and grab it right away. Chloride and sodium. That's what salt is made of, sodium chloride, NaCl. So that's why we have so much of that in there. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. Okay, so how can we put nutrients into the seawater? We have dissolving of gases like nitrogen and carbon dioxide, upwelling and runoff. Here's your dissolving of gases. So nitrogen can be in the form of nitrogen gas. It can also be in a solid form whenever it's in fertilizer. But if this is gases, then we're talking about gases. Carbon's in the form of carbon dioxide. So the amount that can dissolve depends on a couple things. The temperature, colder water holds gases better. The amount of gas present in the atmosphere. So how much is already there? If we have a large amount of gas in the atmosphere, but a low amount in the water, it will naturally diffuse in because the gases want to be in an equilibrium like everything else. So just because of physics and the way particles are, there wants to be an equal amount of, you know, whatever gas, whatever the particle is, whether it's carbon dioxide or it is nitrogen, an equal amount in the atmosphere and an equal amount into the ocean. Sometimes that doesn't happen though, because you might have a lot of mixing. So there might be a lot of waves, a lot of wind, and more carbon dioxide actually gets brought into the ocean. But then once things settle down, it will start to diffuse out again. And the amount of mixing at the surface. you know, same thing. If there's a lot of wind, if there's a lot of waves, you're going to have more of that, you know, that water taking in the what's that word I'm looking for? The gas. So kind of think of it like this. Okay. I don't know how good this looks. Hold on now. Let me make this big. Okay, this is just kind of how I think of it. Oh, this is strange. This is really hard to do. I'm like holding this up with my hand and it's a little backwards and everything's backwards. This is like when I tried to teach myself how to play Call of Duty, which I was very successful at, but learning how to shoot and aim at the same time is hard. Okay, so let's see here. Oh, this is backwards. How funny. How ugly. Okay, this is my wave. No. Oh, backwards. Okay. This is like a ton of gas right here. We have CO2, we have nitrogen, we have oxygen. Ah, they're all backwards. Hold on. Now they're good. Okay. And yeah. And then this is like a gas. You know, all these are gases. So this wave is going to like swallow it up and then bring these gases into the ocean. So then we just have gas bubbles in the ocean. Gas bubbles, gas bubbles, gas bubbles. And then once things settle, you know, it will start to diffuse out again. That's how I look at it. Like the waves are like eating the gases. All right. Let's move this back from being backwards. Not make it so big. Fix it. Great. Good. Awesome. Couple words here. Listen, I am not fantastic. Like it's I don't know. I like have a mental struggle at figuring out the difference between source and sink. The definitions are just bogus to me. And then the examples that come with it are also weird. So if you have like a good way of remembering it, please share that with me. It's helpful. That being said, I haven't seen many or any test questions about sources and sinks. So that's good. So I don't feel super pressured to learn it either. Anyway. A sink is an area where there's a net loss of material, an overall loss. So I guess like the atmosphere could be a sink if it's losing gases to the ocean, and the ocean can be a sink when it's losing gases to the air. Did I just learn? I don't know. Okay, and this is when more gas is being dissolved into the water than is being diffused in the atmosphere. It's called a sink. A source is where there's a net gain of material. So this would be, I guess, when the ocean is taking in carbon dioxide and the atmosphere is losing it, the ocean would be the source as an overall gain. When the atmosphere is an overall gain, it would be the source. Typically, they stay in equilibrium. Okay, notice that because things are in a cycle, they typically stay in equilibrium. I want to show you this for all of them. Let me just get to a cycle. So looking at carbon really quick, I know I'm just jumping through for a second. Things are going to remain equilibrium here as well. You know, in physics and in science, energy can't be created or destroyed. The amount of energy that the world was created with is now going to be constant. It can be just transferred. And matter can't be created or destroyed, just transferred. That includes gases, liquids, solids. So where we have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that might be given to us through human activities like burning fossil fuels, it can get put into the ocean. Well, it can also come out of the ocean. So here's an overall equilibrium. Organisms uptake. They take in carbon. Well, they also respire out carbon. So right here should be an overall equilibrium. We are eating carbon. Sometimes we are a reservoir for nutrients, especially people who are like obese, very obese. They have a lot of nutrients and a lot of organic material in their body that they are not releasing back into the environment. You know, and a way to do that would be through respiration, through burning and breaking down and using all of those extra energy sources and breathing it back into the environment. So they're kind of hoarding. They're hoarding our nutrients. I also feel that way about like the North. You know, all their leaves fall off the trees, and so they don't get photosynthesis anymore. You know, so I feel like they're taking our oxygen from, you know, your southern states that still have the sun shining. We're still doing photosynthesis. That gas is diffusing up to places that don't have photosynthesis anymore. And I just don't think it's right. Anyways, the amount that are decaying and sinking into reefs is not necessarily equal to what's coming up through upwelling. Some of these get incorporated into the rocks and the actual sediment of the ocean. And over millions of years, these can turn back again into these oil reserves and these fossil fuels. And then here we're going to get them back out when we go back to human activities. So the main takeaway from this is I want you guys to see that it does stay in a relative equilibrium. One of the exam style questions I think we're going to go over this week talks about, suggest what happens to the amount of magnesium over time. You know, just because it has a different cycle on it doesn't mean it's going to change too much, went too far. Again, what's being weathered and eroded is being run off into the water, but also we're putting it back in through fertilizer and manure, also sewage dissolving in the water. Okay, organisms are going to take it up and incorporate it. And then that means magnesium really gets stuck inside those organisms in their tissues. So, you know what's missing here? Harvesting is missing. Because you do take it back out. You know what? I don't see harvesting. Okay. I don't see harvesting in any of them. So I imagine it's just something that you're going to have to just know that that's one of the ways we're going to have to remove it. Taking organisms out of the ocean, we're taking that magnesium or whatever they have inside of them. Too far, too far, too far. Okay. Looking at the carbon dioxide into and out of the oceans over a course of a year. So blue and purple are carbon sinks. And again, a sink is going to be where there's a net loss of material. I don't know why this is such a difficult picture for me. Green is equilibrium, which makes sense. Okay. Okay. The sink is going to be, there's a net loss of material. So it has to be that there's a net loss of material from the atmosphere and it's going into the ocean. No, that's not what it means. This means there's a loss. Why is there such a loss in the equatorial area, or not the equatorial areas, your temperate areas? But there's a gain right here. Do organisms do respiration more where it's red? I want to say runoff. I don't know. If you can help my brain through this, please help my brain. Colder temperatures have less carbon in them. That is, I don't know. I don't know. I was going to say maybe because of photosynthesis, but that would make it have more oxygen, and that wouldn't necessarily be right here. I'm just going to, please just help my brain. Moving on. I don't know why that's so difficult for me. Upwelling, movement of cold nutrient-rich water brought to the surface. Your nutrients are going to sink to the bottom because they have mass and they are dense. Dead organisms or fecal matter are going to get decomposed whenever they're at the bottom. And then those tiny little nutrients, so nitrogen, phosphorus, magnesium, calcium, and carbon are going to be at the bottom of our oceans. And then through upwelling, it can get brought up. 25% of the fish that are caught from just 5% of the world's oceans. And that's where upwelling occurs. It does not occur everywhere. So how does it happen? So we have winds blow parallel to shore, pushes water away, and that brings water coming back up from the bottom. Something has to come and replace that water loss. Or we also have surface winds pushing the water offshore. We can call those offshore winds. pushes the water away from the shore. And so that we have this overall loss of water here. Water from the bottom is going to bring up nutrients with it, and it's going to replenish that loss of water. Downwelling is going to be the opposite. Sorry. Excuse me. Downwelling is the opposite. We're going to have like towards the shore winds, pushing water towards the shore, and then it's going to go underneath or subduct. All right. Sorry, Jasmine. And all right, here's our parallel winds, and it's pushing water away. Nutrient-rich water is coming up to take it. Runoff, runoff. Make myself smaller. Okay, this is water from lakes, streams, rivers flowing into the ocean. The water is going to evaporate whenever it's warm, which is a huge problem with hurricanes. Whenever we're evaporating, we're creating an area. It's kind of like a vacuum. You're creating an area of really low pressure, right? Because you have all these water particles here, but then they start to get really warm, and warm things rise, and so they rise. Well, now down here we have this area of emptiness where there used to be a lot of water pressure, but it got warm, so it rose. And what's going to come here? Any of the air around it all comes to condense. We felt that. We felt that last week when the Panhandle got their hurricane. You know, they're just sucking global air, globally, from all around them. And it's just that area of low pressure. You know, things go from an area of high pressure to low pressure, or a high amount of something to a low amount of something, because they want to be in equilibrium. So if there's a low amount of pressure in the middle of that hurricane, it's going to suck in air from all around it to try and put it at equilibrium. Problem is, in the middle of the hurricane, the water is still so warm. The water over the surface is really warm, and it's going to continue to evaporate, again, causing that area of low pressure, more low pressure. We have particles here, a lot of gas molecules, and they're warm, so they rise. Now we have this emptiness. Air gets sucked in. Again, it gets warm and rises, air gets sucked in. So as long as that hurricane is over warm water, I think it has to be 68 degrees Fahrenheit minimum. 68.5, I think. I don't remember. I'll figure out in chapter 6. But as long as it's over really warm water, that is the fuel source. So that's why it always starts to die down whenever it's over land. Also why the one last week was so big and so strong, because you had a lot of heat, and you had, like, the Gulf is super warm. It's way warmer than the Atlantic. Anyway, spoiler alert, chapter 6. So infiltration is going to be when our runoff or our precipitation is soaking into the ground and filters into the ground. Infiltration, filter in. The speed that water filters in, it depends on what kind of soil you have. So if you have sandy soil that has like large particles and like large gaps in it, sandy, rocky, shell-like soil, it's going to filter through a lot, right? We're going to have big gaps, and water is going to trickle down really well. But if we have very small particle sizes, like clay and mud, very small, it's very tiny little areas the water can infiltrate through. So we're not going to have a high infiltration rate. Water is going to end up sitting, and that can cause some flooding. The higher the infiltration rate, the lower amount of surface runoff. And that should make sense because water is being absorbed. So if you had clay, right, clay or like mud, you're going to have water sitting on top of it. You're going to have a lot of runoff coming off of that. But if you have sandy soil, water gets absorbed really well, not much runoff because there's not much water on top of the surface. So as water flows towards the sea, it's going to leach or to steal nutrients from the soil, and it's going to dissolve those nutrients within its own water molecule. So it always goes weathering and erosion. This is for solids. So magnesium, nitrogen, when it's in the form of a fertilizer, phosphorus, and calcium. They're going to be weathered and eroded, and then leached or dissolved into water, and then run off into the oceans or the rivers. Remember, gases like nitrogen gas, carbon dioxide gas, they do not get leached. They do not run off. They do not weather and erode. They dissolve. So how do we take away nutrients from the surface layer? The main way is going to be uptake. So organisms taking in nutrients. We can also call that consumption, but the best word to know is uptake. And then them assimilating it and using those nutrients as a part of their tissues. So producers, they fix inorganic compounds to organic compounds that can pass up the food chain. And they have an energy source. Remember, that's what a producer is. They use an energy source to fix inorganic to organic. Phytoplankton take up nitrate ions to produce amino acids, which can make proteins for the phytoplankton structure. Zooplankton will eat the phytoplankton, and then they digest the proteins to produce their own. Same reason why we do it. The protein that a plant makes when we eat plants is not going to be the same protein we need in our body, but it's made of the same building blocks. So we can take those building blocks apart and rebuild our own. Other processes that will remove nutrients from the surface layer is going to be that marine snow concept, or the falling of dead material and fecal matter. Putting it into coral reefs. So coral reefs or corals actually taking or doing uptake and taking in that calcium and that carbon and then making it into their shells. Now it's removed from the surface layer. Also harvesting, humans taking them out. And we, again, like I said, we don't go back and excrete back in the ocean. Oh, I have to put the nitrates back in. We don't do that. We don't go, to die back in the ocean. Oh, I have to return the nutrients. It would make sense. Here's something to think about. What if the ocean was like our new burial ground? I feel like we run out of space and resources to put people in a casket in the ground. What if we put people in the ocean? I know people are like, oh, that's immoral, it's unethical, but is it? I think it's the best for the environment. It's the most sustainable. It would be good for everybody. They can use our calcium. Just something to think about. Marine snow. Okay, marine snow it's particulate matter. It's organic particulate matter, so that it came from a living organism, and it falls to the ocean, to the deep of the ocean. And it's called marine snow because it's white and it looks like it's snowing whenever it's super dark, if you can see anything. So if you have a light at the bottom of the ocean and you see these things, it looks like it could be snowing. It's composed of fecal matter, dead animals, phytoplankton, zooplankton. They'll continue to be food for the deep ocean, for your detritivores and for your decomposers. Fish and other zooplankton can eat it on their way down, and a lot of filter feeders will take it in, including your tube worms. Mussels that are at the bottom of the ocean, a lot of them are just sucking in particulate matter, and that's how they get it. And here's some of it. Fecal matter, dead animals, zooplankton, phytoplankton. Okay, fourth period is starting. I'm going to pause this. Are we back? Okay, yeah, awesome. All right, so it's the end of the day. Incorporation into coral reefs. So coral polyps, they're little baby corals, and we're going to be doing coral reefs next chapter. They secrete a hard shell made of calcium carbonate, CaCO3, and that protects themselves from weathering and erosion, and protects themselves from currents, protects themselves from wave action, and that also helps protect their zooxanthellae. Corals can also feed off zooplankton. They can also feed off that marine snow, and they like filter feed it in. But that's not enough to keep the whole coral alive, because you also have other filter feeders within that coral environment. So that's why they need help from another producer. That's why they need help from the zooxanthellae. It's just not enough to keep them sustainable. So the reason why we're even talking about this is because corals are a reservoir for a lot of nutrients. Even after corals become bleached or die out, normally they'd be very vibrant, like what you see in here. Even after that happens, the coral shell can remain for anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 years, and that contains a lot of calcium and carbon. Okay, harvesting. That's me when I caught a huge marlin, having a couple years ago. So harvesting is the removal of marine species. In 2016, it was estimated that the 2010 fish catch was 109 million metric tons. It's a lot. We're not always putting it back. Other species that are also harvested, not just fish, are crustaceans, so like crab and lobsters, king crab, blue crabs, mollusks, squid, octopus, mussels, clams, scallops, and some macroalgae, seaweed. Everybody loves a nice seaweed salad. Not me. I don't like seaweed salad. I don't like seaweed. If I get sushi, I have to have the rice on the outside because it's too seaweedy for me. I want to like it. I don't. But all the nutrient species are removed from the ecosystem when they're caught. They don't get put back. Like I said, like nobody is like, well, when you guys finish eating this fish, you need to go back to the ocean and defecate because I need to make sure the nutrients are getting back. That doesn't happen. They can get back a little bit, just a little bit. So when humans eat fish, we will excrete nitrogen compounds in our urine. That's what ammonia is. The urine will go to a sewage plant or a water treatment plant, and then after treatment, it's going to be put into the rivers and oceans. So they don't remove the nitrogen or the hydrogen out of the water. They most likely take it out of the form of being ammonia, but the nitrogen and the hydrogen are right back in the water again. Okay, and then just the basic structure of the nutrient cycles. What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? I don't know what that noise is. I'm annoyed that I can see this. We did this for bell work, I think on Thursday. And I had you guys draw in some water just to kind of give you some perspective on what we're looking at. So anything up here is happening in the atmosphere and land. If it's a gas, it's going to be dissolving and then just dissolving into the water. If it's a solid, it's going to be weathered and eroded, leached, and then dissolved in water, and then run off into the rivers or oceans. If organisms are taking in this nutrient, it's called uptake or consumption or feeding. And then if when the organisms die, they're going to sink and decay and go to the seabed. And this is true for all of your cycles. It's not specific to any one. And then the way we get nutrients coming up from the seabed is called upwelling. Why would it just keep that there? It's kind of frustrating. Awesome. Bad webcam, eraser. I don't want the eraser. I want this one. Okay. Carbon is the basis of all organic material. That needs to be your answer for all the questions. State a way that carbon is used in organisms, organic material, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, amino acids. But you might want to save your nucleic and amino acids for phosphorus and nitrogen. Just saying. So carbon is going to enter the biotic phase through photosynthesis, always, or chemosynthesis. But that's how we're going to take carbon from an inorganic source and put it into an organic source. Carbon is present, it's typically released through respiration and combustion, but us breathing out or talking, that's going to be respiration. The main way carbon can get into the ocean is from it dissolving from the atmosphere into the surface. Remember, gases dissolve. The word dissociation is a reversible chemical change, so you can't go back and forth, where one molecule or a single compound is broken up into two. So an example of this would be this calcium carbonate, C6H12O6, glucose, C6H12O6. That dissociates into carbon dioxide and water, and we breathe it out. So CO2 is breathed out and H2O is breathed out. And the molecules that you took in was C6H12O6. So some C, some H, some O, and it comes back out in the form of water and carbon dioxide. Okay, carbon dioxide can turn into carbonic acid in water. If I was your teacher for biology, we didn't do this last year, but the past 2 years, we did do this for respiration. We looked at the effect of exercise on respiration. Mr. Alzaraki's calling, hold on. Somebody forgot their pencil pouch. Okay. Okay, so like I was saying, if I was your bio teacher when we did respiration, we looked at the effect of exercise and respiration. And we can do that in class as a quick little demo just to prove to you that carbon dioxide gets dissolved or stuck in seawater. It's hard for us to understand because we don't see it happening, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. With that being said, with your life, just because you don't see something, it doesn't mean it's there. Right? Right. Okay. So carbon dioxide can create carbonic acid in seawater. H2CO3 is carbonic acid. H2CO3 is one compound, can dissociate, break up into hydrogen carbonate ions, HCO3, and hydrogen ions. This is a bad thing right here, this H+. Having extra H's makes things acidic. That's why we're measuring pH, means the power of hydrogen. How strong are the hydrogen compounds in a solution? Okay, it can dissociate even further. I want to get that bottom. Okay. HCO3 can dissociate even further into carbonate ions and even more hydrogen ions. What does the bottom say? Oh, I know what it says. It says in seawater, 89% of dissolved inorganic carbon is found as hydrogen carbonate. This one. 10% is carbonate and 1% is only dissolved carbon dioxide. You can come in. Only dissolved carbon dioxide. That's because it gets, carbon dioxide gets created to carbonic acid. I'll see you. So that's why it doesn't stay too long. Even though you have a ton of organisms respirating, it doesn't stay too long. It turns into carbonic acid. Thought I was forgetting something. Okay. A little bit continued. The algae and photosynthetic bacteria that are in phytoplankton. I want to move this. Okay, their job is to take in or assimilate or incorporate carbon dioxide and put it into glucose. This can then be used for other structures inside of the plant. For example, glucose is turned into cellulose. Cellulose, what is it? 300,000 glucose molecules makes one cellulose. We can't break down cellulose. Humans can't. The phytoplankton are then eaten by zooplankton, and then the carbon compounds are broken down for respiration. They breathe it back out. Zooplankton can then assimilate the carbon compounds into their own biomass, like making lipids, making proteins. And then this proceeds whenever the zooplankton are eaten by a smaller fish or a whale. At each stage, respiration is still occurring. So at every single stage, they're still breathing out. They're still breaking apart the sugar that they have to give themselves ATP, adenosine triphosphate. We need that for phosphorus. At every stage, they're breaking apart sugar molecules to give themselves energy. So this is going to constantly be happening. And then this carbon dioxide, if there's a lot of carbon dioxide in the ocean, will diffuse up into the atmosphere to put it at equilibrium. When organisms die, the organic matter is decomposed and returned to the water as inorganic carbon. Some can fall to the bottom as marine snow can stay for a long period of time. Gross, sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to run through this cycle with you. Then my mother called me. I'm going to have to call her back. So let's start with up here at the top, in the top right, human activities. So this is going to be combustion, burning fossil fuels, also us breathing and talking. Produces a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. All organisms doing respiration will release carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide can dissolve into the water, right? This is our surface right here. And if there is a lot of carbon dioxide in the water compared to, like in the surface, compared to the atmosphere, then it can diffuse back out. can dissolve in and diffuse out. So it pretty much stays in an equilibrium. And then here, just like I just mentioned, 89% of our carbon is in a hydrogen carbonate compound. That was your last slide. It was in a hydrogen carbonate compound. Only 1% is carbon dioxide. So organisms, marine organisms, our producers can do uptake and take those in and assimilate them into their own body, or, photosynthesis, chemosynthesis. Marine organisms as well, including producers, also need to get themselves energy from the glucose that they synthesize. And so again, they're also going to be doing respiration. They're releasing the energy, they're releasing the carbon dioxide waste and the water waste that was a byproduct from cellular respiration, from breaking apart glucose to give yourself energy. How does it get to the bottom or become a part of calcium carbonate that is in corals? You've death and sinking and then decay, and it can get incorporated into reefs if there's reefs there. Otherwise, it could be put into shell organisms. Sorry, Jasmine. Dissolving of shells, erosion and upwelling is going to bring the carbon from the bottom of the ocean to the top. So again, I did mention this in class. You can't just take a shell and move it to the top. Like, that's going to have a lot of mass. It's not going to move up with upwelling. So you need to have pieces being eroded or dissolved, whether it's from just, currents and wave action and hitting rocks and sand rubbing up against it, or like ocean acidification, breaking it down. Any of those will cause it to turn into little particles, and then those can be brought back up. Okay, carbon cycle continued. I think it's almost over. Every year, there's approximately 2 gigatons added to the ocean from human activities. And if we think about, the way we are polluting our own waterways, we are putting, in increasing the temperature, causing algal blooms from runoff, excess nutrients, and fecal waste. The plants should be a huge reservoir for carbon dioxide specifically. They should be holding onto nutrients a lot. Oh, I'm sorry. But we are putting in way more than plants are taking out. This is true for on land, like for deforestation. We are putting in so much more carbon than we are taking out, and we will turn on like combustion engines to cut down a tree, right? So we're putting more carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere to cut down the one thing that's going to filter them out, trees and producers. So it's stupid. The increase of dissolved carbon dioxide in the ocean is creating more carbonic acid. That's what it turns into. So the pH of seawater has actually decreased by 30% since the 18th century. The decrease can definitely start breaking down carbonate ions, causing corals to be really easily damaged because they're going to have like a really weak shell. It can dissolve the shells of shrimps, mollusks, lobsters, anything that has a calcium shell is going to be at risk. Now, their shell is like their body's main way of protecting themselves. So if they're constantly trying to remake their shell, they're not going to be spending time on, on like, if it's a coral, they're not going to be spending time on, helping the zooplankton do photosynthesis. They won't at all. So that'll slow down photosynthesis. And if it's like a shrimp or a crab, they're not going to be spending time on finding a mate, producing really good cells and, like sperm and egg cells. They're not going to be doing that. They're going to be spending their whole time trying to fix their body. They're not going to be out eating. They're not going to be out trying to find a mate, hunting, or even trying to protect themselves from predators. Their main goal now is going to be fix my shell, fix my shell, fix my shell. So that's really going to slow down a lot of their population growth. So how could we try and prevent this? So something called ocean seeding is trying to happen. This is by adding iron. Iron is a limiting nutrient, and it can definitely increase the productivity of phytoplankton. So it would increase the intake of carbon dioxide, right? They're doing photosynthesis more. This is going to help prevent acidification, prevent the excess of carbon dioxide. However, we've seen numerous times that's not good. Having your producers boom in a population is going to cause a harmful algal bloom. And putting in iron into the ocean and having it increase like that, having the phytoplankton population increase, the long-term effects of iron in the water is not known. Okay, our nitrogen cycle. We need nitrogen for amino acids. We need it for proteins. We need it for nucleic acids, for DNA, for RNA. We need it for enzymes. We need it for hormones. What else did we say? ATP. I would save ATP for phosphorus, though. Okay, that's a good deal of them. The cycle's more complex because most producers can't take in nitrogen gas. We have to convert it into a usable form. So nitrogen gas is not flammable. It's not combustible. It is unreactive. It doesn't cause rust. It doesn't do anything. It is unreactive. It has its octet rule is full. It has 8 electrons for one of the nitrogens, 8 electrons for the other. It's a happy nitrogen. It's nitrogen gas. N2 is nitrogen gas. So that's where we have nitrogen fixation. It's like our nitrogen conversion. We have to convert the nitrogen. So there is a genus of marine organisms, the marine organism is called diazotrophs, and I mentioned this in our going over the vocab quiz. Diazo means N2, so it's nitrogen gas, and then troph is feeder. So they are able to fix nitrogen gas into usable forms. So definition, it's an organism that's able to grow without an external source of fixed nitrogen because it's able to convert nitrogen gas into substances like ammonia. Bacteria and archaea bacteria can do this. I keep yawning. I'm back. Ooh, an enzyme. I haven't talked about enzymes in a year. Okay, nitrogen fixation requires the enzyme nitrogenase. Enzymes end in ACE. How exciting! So its job is to speed up the fixation of nitrogen. When you say fixation, think conversion, like the transforming of. So nitrogenase needs low levels of oxygen to function. There's specialized cells for nitrogen fixing that are inside of your diazotrophs. And these cells also require low levels of oxygen versus cells that do carbon fixing, like photosynthesis. They need very high levels of oxygen. Okay, so, and I've never seen this on a test question, but it's interesting, and it's in your book, and #learning and being smart and all those things. So it's inside a diazotroph. These are diazotrophs. And they have these external filaments that help them absorb excess nitrogen in the water, kind of like little root hairs, but not. And inside their cells, they're special cells that have nitrogenase, and they need low levels of oxygen to do this. Carbon fixing, converting carbon into a usable form, you need high levels of oxygen. Ammonia, which is NH3, dissolves in seawater. Ammonium ions are formed, NH4. And phytoplankton can convert this into proteins. So ammonia can get dissolved in seawater. Like when I go pee in the ocean, and all you guys go pee in the ocean, we're excreting ammonia. Fish and organisms with gills that are in the marine ecosystem and an oceanic ecosystem will excrete ammonia from their gills. They don't excrete it in urine because they really try and keep their urine just for waste. Like we have large amounts of urine because we're filtering out water. In a marine or oceanic saltwater ecosystem, you're not trying to get rid of water because fresh water is, it's a rarity. So they will excrete ammonia out of their gills and not out of their urine. Okay, and the ammonium ions can be converted into proteins. Phytoplankton can take this in and convert it. Phytoplankton can also take in nitrate and nitrite ions, but oxygen has to be removed, and that requires energy. They are in higher concentrations than ammonia, so many photosynthesizers take this in. However, it does require energy to remove the oxygen from it. So just to get it in a normal nitrogen. Nitrate, nitrite, the oxygen must be removed and it requires energy. Okay. Yes, the nitrogen cycle is complex, but don't be scared of it. You can learn whatever you want through repetition, listen and read the notes a few times for each cycle, and draw the cycles out. Some of you guys didn't do that today when I checked notes. Like, I didn't, whatever. Copy this chart in your notebook for more of a concise chart and different organisms involved in the nitrogen cycle. Okay, and I would do this for sure because there are many steps. Your diazotroph was an organism that's able to convert nitrogen gas into ammonia. Oh gosh, sorry to cough on camera. Okay, the nitrogen cycle continued. Proteins created by phytoplankton are passed to consumers. So anybody that eats them is going to take in their proteins. Consumers will can break down their proteins into their small monomers, which are amino acids, and then rebuild their own. Just like I said, think about like a Lego house. I don't need to live in a dungeon, but I can take the dungeon Lego house apart and build myself a castle. And then they die. When producers and consumers die, their proteins are broken back down into amino acids. They're smaller little building blocks. And saprophytic bacteria and fungi are breaking these proteins down. And they're from the dead organic matter. Sapro means rotten or decaying, and phyte is plant-like. I don't know. I don't thought phyte was it's Death Eater. I thought phyte was lover of. Whatever. Death Eater. They eat dead things. Okay. And then after the saprophyte break down the proteins into amino acids, we have ammonifying bacteria. What do they do? They create ammonia. Ammonification. Their job is to create ammonia. Ammonifying bacteria convert the amino acids into ammonia. Ammonia can then be oxidized into nitrites, then nitrates in a process called nitrification. Read this a few times. This is not something you talk about every day. So read it a few times. Read it a few times. And over again. Ammonia is then oxidized into nitrites, then nitrates in nitrification. Okay, so I was just repeating that. Nitrites, then nitrates, nitrification. Bacteria called Nitrosomonas convert ammonia into nitrites. Nitrobacter converts nitrites to nitrates. And this was an extra credit question. They are chemoautotrophs, and they gain energy from their reactions. From these energy conversions, they get energy out of it. Okay, and the chemicals that they're using is like nitrogen. Lastly, denitrifying bacteria converts nitrates, NO3, and ammonia, NH3, back into nitrogen gas. This reduces the amount of nitrogen available for phytoplankton, and since it's a limiting nutrient, nitrogen is, and so is phosphorus, it limits productivity. So this last step, denitrifying bacteria, it does kind of slow down this process. If they would just keep it in the form of nitrate and in the form of ammonia, we wouldn't have to go through this huge step. All right. Okay, so I'm going to start right here. So fertilizers, sewer, or manure. This is solid nitrogen. This is when it's in its solid state. They can get eroded and then leached by water, and then they dissolve. Oh, sorry, I'm one step ahead. They're going to get dissolved into soil water. So this dissolving word could also be called leaching. And then it's going to run off into a river or a sea. And then if it's into a river, that's going to go further into a sea. It'll get there eventually. Here's your surface. It has a lot of dissolved nitrate ions. Marine organisms can take it up in uptake. nitrate ions. Oops. Marine organisms, then, if they can die, whether they're being consumed or whatever, they die, death, decay, and sinking. And then we have nitrogen compounds found in the seabed. How does nitrogen compounds from the seabed come back up? Erosion and upwelling. Okay, so that just took this part here. Okay, so, but what if we have them in the surface of the sea and it somehow goes back into the atmosphere? So this is that last one right here, the denitrifying bacteria. So it's taking nitrate. Was it nitrites as well? No, it's an ammonia. Nitrate and ammonia, it's putting it back in the atmosphere. Well, that gas has to be N2. It's denitrification, putting it back into the form of nitrogen gas. Okay. All right. So if we start over here in the atmosphere, we're going to have dissolving. I'm just making sure. I thought I missed something. Okay. It's in the atmosphere, nitrogen gas, 70% of our atmosphere is nitrogen gas, will dissolve into the sea. We're not going to see it diffusing out because there will, I won't say never, but 70% of gas in the atmosphere is nitrogen. A very small amount of that is going to be nitrogen gas in the ocean. So we're never going to have it going the opposite way. There's never going to be too much nitrogen in the ocean that it has to diffuse out to put itself in equilibrium with the atmosphere. It's not going to happen. So it's not going to go both ways like the carbon did. It's going to go in. Okay, we have nitrogen fixation. Sorry. Trying to find where nitrogen fixation was. There it is. Okay, and this was from your diazotrophs. Yes, the diazotrophs did nitrogen fixation. So this is converting the N2 form, the nitrogen gas form, into like ammonia or like ions that we can use. So now we have a reservoir of dissolved ammonium ions in the surface. If the bacteria, the denitrifying bacteria, take the ammonia and convert it back to nitrogen gas, that's called denitrification, it's put back in a gas. We can also have it being taken in through marine organisms, them taking in the ammonia. They would prefer that because they can't take in just nitrogen, so ammonia they can take in. Marine organisms, if they die and decay, it moves it back to the surface of the sea. I'm trying to think, why would ammonium float and not sink? I don't know. I don't know why it's going to the surface there. Anyway. And then nitrification. Nitrification is going from your dissolved ammonium ions to nitrate. And then we can be denitrified and put back in the atmosphere. Some ammonium ions are dissolved in soil water. How does this happen? Peeing outside. Any organism that pees outside is going to have this dissolved in soil water, and then it can, infiltrate and then go, or just be runoff, just have those ions leached whenever it rains, and it takes it into the surface of the sea. Takeaway from this, we can't use nitrogen gas. We have to convert it into other forms. The magnesium cycle. So we have to have magnesium to synthesize chlorophyll. C5, 5H7, 2O5. That means 2 O5 molecules. N4, Mg. There's your magnesium. So this is found in rocks. For example, dolomite. Dolomite is a rock that enters water through weathering and erosion. In many chemical industries and in fertilizers, you can find dolomite. So the main way that it's going to enter the ocean is going to be through runoff and then having that molecule leached from the soil. So weathering, erosion, leaching, and then running. The removal of magnesium ions is through them depositing down into the sediment. That's what deposition is, depositing into the sediment or falling and settling into the sediment. Because it's in every living cell, because your producers need them, and then whatever eats a producer, you're going to eat, or vice versa. So no matter what, you're going to get that magnesium put back into you because it was used in a producer. So anytime organisms die, magnesium can go to the bottom of the ocean. Taking organisms out of the ocean, fishing, harvesting, and then the incorporation of organisms within the coral reef. I'm using it. That's how we remove it. So organisms using it for uptake, having them be deposited in the bottom of the sediment, or us just harvesting organisms out. Stupid keyboard. Okay, so it's in rocks, for example, dolomite. There's weathering and erosion. Leaching must occur. So now it gets stuck in the soil water and then it runs off to the rivers and the sea. Okay, here's our ocean. These are also found in fertilizers. So it could be in fertilizers, sewage, or manure. And then that gets dissolved, broken into smaller pieces, leached, and then going into the rivers of the sea. So we find it in rocks. We also find it in fertilizers, sewage, and manure. Okay, then we have it at the surface of the sea. Organisms, like your producers, will do uptake or take it in because they need it for chlorophyll. And now it's in our biotic component, or in our food chains. Organisms will die and sink and decay, and then they're in the seabed, and then we have erosion and upwelling, and it comes back up. Calcium cycle. We need this for healthy bones, for corals, for teeth, for shells. Rainwater can react with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to form carbonic acid, H2CO3. And I mentioned this too with the carbon cycle. When carbon dioxide gets dissolved into water, it creates carbonic acid. This extracts calcium from the calcium-rich rocks like limestone, marble, dolomite. A lot of them have calcium in them. And it releases it, it extracts the calcium in the form of calcium hydrogen carbonate. This gets dissolved in water and enters the ocean through runoff. So what's actually going to the ocean is calcium hydrogen carbonate. Calcium hydrogen carbonate. Because it's calcium that's been extracted from carbonic acid. Calcium hydrogen carbonate. Okay, and we can get dissolved in the water, that's leaching, and then run off. Coccolithophores. So for short, they're called coccoliths. So coccolithophores. Lithos means plates. And imagine Kako is going to mean like calcium plates. They like all these like circular plates on them. They're in a circular form. They're a photosynthesizer. So it's a type of phytoplankton. They use calcium to produce scales called coccoliths. And they are made of calcium carbonate, CaCO3. It's a type of phytoplankton. The scales are transparent. We can't see them. We can see through them. And that is good because it doesn't disrupt photosynthesis. It allows all of the colors to come through and not reflect anything off. It is also suggested that that can help against predators and help against like osmotic changes or like changes in water pressure. The production of scales can increase photosynthesis because the creation of calcium carbonate releases calcium as a byproduct. So the more scales that they make, the faster they can do photosynthesis, provided the other factors are right. The temperature is right, the pH is right, the light intensity is correct. What else is limiting? Pressure. Water isn't limiting, so those are good. So the production of those coccolith scales can increase your photosynthesis rate because when they create calcium carbonate, when they create these shells, they release carbon dioxide as a byproduct. Coccolithophores are eaten by zooplankton. And that's how our calcium gets passed on to other organisms. When they die, they sink to the bottom of the ocean floor. That's part of our marine snow. And they become part of the sediment. Chalk is formed from deposited coccolithophores that deposited millions and millions of years ago. The White Cliffs of Dover in England are famous examples of chalk from coccolithophores. This is chalk-like. Now it's hard. It has some hardness to it, but it is chalk-like. Has to be hard, right? Or this would just crumble all over the ground. But you can see, you know, this edge right here tells you that this used to be, makes me nervous. All these people are so close to this edge. Makes me want to vomit. But in order for this edge of the seabed or the land to have all of those white deposits, all of that calcium deposits, must mean that this area was once underwater. This had to be a part of the seabed, and a very deep part of the seabed at that, because this is where we had a lot of it settling and you know, depositing. You can see that. You can see the depth of it. I love plate tectonics. Okay, so here we have calcium typically present in rocks. So then we have weathering and erosion. Calcium hydrogen carbonate, remember that's what it becomes whenever it's mixed with water, calcium hydrogen carbonate, can dissolve in soil water. That's called leaching. And then it gets run off into the rivers and the seas. We have calcium ions in the surface layer of the sea. Marine organisms are going to take it in because they need it for bones and teeth and shells. When those organisms die, they're going to sink and decay, and these calcium compounds can be either get deposited at the bottom of the seabed or be incorporated into coral reefs. If they're incorporated into coral reefs, because they make calcium carbonate shell, there they can stay for like anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 years. How do they come back up? Well, when the shells start to dissolve, you know, could have been because it was in acidic condition, it starts to dissolve it. There could be erosion, any kind of weathering. It's going to bring that particulate matter back up. Not a huge piece of calcium, just the particles can come back up through upwelling. Phosphorus. We almost done. That's exciting. The phosphorus cycle. So it's used by all things to create nucleic acids. It's also essential for the formation of bones in vertebrate organisms because it's calcium phosphate. Again, for phosphorus, though, we need to know, I want you to know ATP. So DNA, RNA, that's your nucleic acids. Bones, but we're going to use bones for calcium, or you should have, you know, bones for calcium or teeth. And then you could do bones for the phosphorus cycle. ATP and the cell membrane. Remember, it's a phospholipid bilayer. A major source of phosphorus is going to be in rocks, like the rock apatite, and also fertilizers. Phosphorus attaches to soil particles and is added to the water through soil erosion. So if it's attaching to soil particles and it's getting added into the water's leaching it from those particles and then runs off with it. Phosphates are also found in fertilizers, poop, manure, sewage, and they all enter the water through runoff. All get dissolved and then all go into the water through runoff. Yes. Once phytoplankton take in phosphorus, they can assimilate it or make it a part of their body. They can put it into DNA. They can make their cell membrane. They can use it for the production of ATP. Since there's evidence that phosphorus is low, phytoplankton can alter their cell membranes. Oh, that's awesome. I just read that wrong. There is evidence that when phosphorus is low, phytoplankton can alter their cell membranes. If you look back at like slide 4 or 2 or something, we talked about what's limiting in the ocean. That chart right here. And if you look at phosphorus at the bottom, it is one of the most limiting at 0.07 parts per million. So, you know, phytoplankton, they need a cell wall. They also need a cell membrane. If there's not enough phosphorus, they're not going to waste it on making a cell membrane instead of like ATP or something or a protein. But that's cool. They can do that. When they're eaten, the Consumers that just fed off them, off the phytoplankton, can assimilate phosphorus into their DNA, into their cell membranes, into their bone production. Phosphorus isn't in the bones of phytoplankton because they don't have bones. And then when organisms die, they're going to get decomposed. They're going to sink to the bottom of the sediment, and they can become a part of the sediment, and then they're brought back up through erosion and upwelling. Okay, so they're present in rocks like apatite. They get weathered and eroded, and then you get tiny little particle matter. Then we have it attached to soil particles and attached to the water. That is leaching. Also, if we have it in, not in a rock form, not stuck like in our sediment, but it's present in sewage or manure or fertilizers, or, there's that huge event whenever we have flooding and we release all of our stormwater treatment and all of like our like black and gray water into the river. That's going to go into the ocean. And so that is a huge incorporation of limiting nutrients, phosphorus and nitrogen. But they're going to enter the water through getting dissolved in the soil. That's leaching. Okay, or they're dissolving, into the water. Great. And then that's leaching. And then they run off into the sea. So whether it's coming from rocks or it's coming from fertilizer, manure, or sewage, they're both going to be dissolved into water particles and then run off into the sea. Organisms, like your producers, are going to do uptake and take in the phosphorus ions, into themselves, and they can use it for their cell membranes, for ATP, for DNA, for RNA. They could die, and they're going to sink and decay. Then we have phosphorus present into the seabed, and then erosion and upwelling will bring it back up. So for each one, and hopefully you've seen this through a practice in class, why is it biologically important? So why do we need it? And we did that in bowel work today. I told you just make sure you know more than just one answer for these, because on your back page, you have a question that says state 2 uses of phosphorus. So I don't want you just to keep one tool in your toolbox, have at least 2, and these are going to be memorized really fast. I want you to just be like, oh, I know this one. Chlorophyll, magnesium. You can only have one answer for magnesium, and that's chlorophyll. Know how it gets into the ocean. Is it weathered and eroded and then leached and then into runoff? Or is it dissolved because it's a gas? Know how it leaves the ocean. Does it get deposited on the bed? Does it get diffused out because it's a gas? Is it taken out through harvesting? I think those are the ways that things leave the ocean. Am I missing one? That add nutrients? Processes that remove. Oh, from the surface, yeah. So it's being incorporated into a coral reef. That does remove nutrients from the surface layer. Harvesting, depositing, or that marine snow being incorporated into a coral reef. Bye, guys. See you later. Test on Monday, and you have your study guide. In a couple days, I'll put the answers to the study guide. I don't want you having it too soon because we'll still practice it in class. And Friday, you have a chapter 2, 3, and 4 quiz, either 20 or 25 words on over all those words from the chapters we've already done. Be ready for that. Your class will only be like 27 minutes long on Friday because you have the pep rally. So just be ready for that. Let's keep our grades going up and enjoy my lecture.